back to another episode of Your Space with your host, Hannah Arinaite. Now, last week, we still had a huge conversation going on in terms of the guardians of the earth. It sounds very interesting, and I am excited to say that we are still here getting the opportunity to answer your questions. We are available on all social media platforms at Your Space Uganda. I'm going to allow my panel to first introduce themselves so that we get an idea on how serious this topic is going to be. I'm going to begin with the lady right here.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Good evening, viewers. I am Patricia Chano Kiria, Deputy Inspector General of Government. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Vian. I'm Sika, and I'm a resilience specialist.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Anna. My name is Monica Acharo. I'm a student at LDC.
Now, when we left off last week, we were still talking about the role that we as young people play when it comes to respecting our environment and the climate, and also what part we play as citizens in this country when it comes to handling the resources taken aside for such situations. But before we get into that conversation, I would just like to know from you, Vianney, what is the status quo currently? Where does Uganda stand in terms of our environment and our climate? I think I did see a couple of videos trending 2 weeks ago on people's cars being swept off the roads and people's buildings falling, and it got me really worried. What is the status quo currently when it comes to the climate and environment in the country? Should we be worried about it?
We should. And that's why this discussion, and I'm happy we have the IGG's office today. It's my first time to have a close interaction with the office in these matters. And what that brings to the table is that each stakeholder, each actor, each community, each individual has a role to play in this. But I want to say, before I talk about that Uganda is, as a country and as government, at a good place. Just 2 weeks ago, we had our energy policy finalized. In other words, giving detail in regards on how we're going to deal with our oil and gas and what that means for this country. Details to do with that are in that policy. Talking about renewable energy, how we should deal with our renewable energy potential as a country, and we should be interested as young people, because that's the policy gives us the legal basis, the background, the foundation upon which we do whatever we want. Actually, a friend of mine, and doctor will agree with me, that everything we do, whether you know it or not, has a legal basis and implication. So that's why I'm beginning there. That as a country, we were among the first countries on COP27 in Egypt, and thank God I had the opportunity to be there. To be among the few countries that had already submitted our national determined contributions in our NDCs as a country. And that shows the readiness of government and the other actors in pushing this forward. Our role as a youth is that we shouldn't sit back, and shortly I'll be giving the details of what we need to do as young people. But also I wanted to say, climate change. What climate change does is that it increases the frequency and the intensity of disasters that happen as a result of climate change. For example, in May, 1st of May 2013, we had the first floods in Kasese. That's when Nyamwamba blocked its banks. It was one river. Last year, all the 4 big rivers of Kasese burst their banks the same night, in one night. What that means is that, if I can use that as even the example used of recently when we saw the trending video of a wash disappearing into the floods, and even on my status I put that all of us need to learn how to swim because of what was happening in Ugogo. Do we have swimming skills, each one of us, especially to swim when there are stones and other things in the water? What that means is that the way we interact with climate change is how it is affecting us. So when a flood happens and we cannot move and there is loss of life, then we are being affected. That's where we communicate. That's how we interact with climate change. When a farmer has planted, when a young person has invested and planted and done some agriculture, and they cannot harvest as expected because it could not rain a little more, or it was the sunshine took longer than it was supposed to take, or there is an outbreak. Because the other thing climate change does is that the disasters that start happening in places that did not used to happen. Last year, we had a flood in Mbale. In our hazard profiling, Mbale is not necessarily a disaster-prone district.
Yeah.
But we had huge flooding happening there. So what climate change does is that it makes these disasters happen with more intensity and destruction, and they even begin to happen in places where they should not be happening. Now, because our development has not been climate resilient or climate focused, when in most cases, when most of our development plans were put in place, the issue of climate change was not yet high on our agenda. And that's why we are emphasizing climate resilient infrastructure, climate resilient development and planning. Okay? Even as we do our laws and policies and planning, to make sure that whatever we do is climate proof, has considered. And that's what we've been discussing, for example, with the people who are working on our roads when we had the Katonga incident. And what does that mean? That in the original design of this road, when we had the bridge break and the other area, the other region was cut off from central, was in the original design of this place was the issue of resilience incorporated in the design to make sure that the right bridge is put in such a place that is a flood-prone area or that is in a swamp. So that's why we're saying that as young people, then we have an opportunity to rise up and first of all be empowered in these matters, be knowledgeable, begin to engage from the point of knowledge and information.
And I think we're coming to that.
And so I wanted to say, I'm happy. I wanted to specifically mention why I'm happy that the IGD's office is here, because now it is giving me an opportunity. It is an opportunity for the IG's office to come and say, look, young people of this country, we need to be the gatekeepers. When we talk about climate finance, when we are talking about corruption, do we actually know what it means? Are we aware of how much has been dedicated so that we can hold the duty bearers accountable? Do we know what we actually need to do in regards to what is available? And that's what I'm going to be talking about later. So as young people,
I wanted you to dig deeper into the irresponsible use of our environment. Like the example you gave about Mbale, if you look at areas around Mbale, the swampy areas, people have planted rice. Rice is all over the place. Slide down to Palisa, the same story. Come down to Kachumbala, Bukedea, the same story. Rice. Down to Soroti, people have encroached on the wetlands. People have even encroached on the road reserve in order to do those irresponsible farming. So what is it that we can do? Because I know that the National Environment Authority is doing something. I know that government has put in place policies and regulations, and it's work in progress. But as young people, because I know the majority of the population we have here, the biggest percentage are young people, can we do a massive outreach so that everybody gets to know that this is wrong, this is right? What can we do to make young people wake up, to be responsible, and know that if I go to cultivate in the wetland, I am affecting the environment. If I go to construct my house in the wetland, I am affecting the environment. And before long, people reap from what they sow. If I go and get a license, bribe my way out, get a license and begin construction, the wetland, and the rains come and sweep away the environment, I mean sweep away the investment, then it is me who is at a loss. So I think we need to work together to bring this to the attention of the young people and know that it's a responsibility of each and every Ugandan to take care of what it is we have around us. Yes.
Definitely.
Honestly, Dr. Patricia, you're right. Climate change and its associated impacts brings in the reality of walking the talk. And that's the honest truth, that we must say what we mean and mean what we say.
Yes.
And this cuts across all the sectors. And as IGG, who have a bit of the mandate to holding duty bearers accountable on our actions, I think as young people right now, we possess the magic bullet to begin to live in harmony with nature. That whatever we do, whether I'm building a house, whether I'm growing rice, whether I'm planting trees, whether I'm setting up a poultry farm, whether whatever I do, I must make sure that I am living in harmony with nature. Because we've seen nature revolt. We saw what happened at Rugogo Bypass, specifically the infrastructure there, where water was flowing in the bank, in the offices.
Yes.
Okay, that is nature revolting. So what that means as young people, now we need to do things differently in terms of one, being aware. OPM, Ministry of Water and Environment, and other offices actually have done mapping of these zones, where we know, for example, flood-prone areas, where they have designated industrial parks. For example, let me pick an example of a swamp, because you're asking about Mbale, and then when you continue towards Soroti and rice growing. When we say living in harmony with the nature, what that means is that the swamp is subdivided in 3 portions. There is the middle part, which is completely conserved, that is untouchable. Okay?
What do you mean by it's untouchable?
It is completely preserved. It's not conserved. It is preserved. It should be untouched or untampered with. You leave it in its natural state.
Or else?
Or else, so then the other part is the surrounding bit, which is the conserved area, where some simple grazing can be done, and picking of firewood. Simple
permissible
activities,
use.
allowable use, so that people also appreciate the ecosystem. They appreciate what God has, the swamp that God has placed to them, or the natural forest that also applies to the forest.
Okay.
Then we have the outside part, which activities like rice growing should be allowed in a controllable manner.
Okay.
What happens is that, you know, those communities grew up growing that rice in a rudimentary way. So what needs to happen now is that young people, we need to be empowered, and that's why Ministry of Water and Environment and NEMA and the other actors should come in and know that if I need to be responsible rice farming. What normally happens is, because we don't care about the environment, we are maximizing benefit and profit is all we are thinking about. We don't think of how do I plant my rice in a way that will make sure that I will plant my rice in this extended third area that is around, do it right, responsibly in an organic manner. Because now when they start applying pesticides and insect, basically pesticides and what is NPK is with fertilizers, then that affects the ecosystem and how the function of the wetland. So in other words, we need to know the 3 areas of the wetland or a natural forest. As young people, we need to be educated. Some of us, maybe we even don't know that this is how you live in harmony with the environment. This is how you plant the rice and do it in the right way. And this is where our mothers are allowed to pick some firewood, some beekeeping, and pick some honey, you know. And this area you cannot tamper and deal with. But we know, and we've seen it especially with industries and factories, where actually even environmental impact assessment is done, and they say you are going to do this particular development in this way. But one of the areas which we've been discussing, when you saw my laptop was open when we started the show, and I was doing an assessment of environmental impact assessment and the regulatory framework, is that after the permit has been given, who actually cares to make sure there is compliance? That's where the gap is. We have a series, and as young people, that's why we need to rise up as monitors. Because I don't need the police for me to know that this particular industry is releasing its waste into the river. And this river downstream, my mother is going to be fetching water for cooking my food that I'm going to eat when I get back home.
Because the supervisory mechanisms you are talking about, we need to be keen and responsible, name and shame, report such cases. If someone is polluting the wetland, such a case should be brought out quickly so that they quickly have it fixed.
I also
Yes,
think that
yeah.
so many of us think that when it comes to reporting of corruption and all, it has to be in relation to only finance
No.
No,
issues. I think we
practices.
haven't yet gone thinking
Looking
beyond
at the
that.
practice.
Let's take a break. We're going to be right back in
We
just a
need
few
to
minutes. Welcome back from that mini break. You are still here on Your Space with your host, Hannah Arinita. Now, this conversation is getting hotter by the second, and my panelists are ready to give their opinions on to the subject. But as I was saying before going to the break, that I think some of us have put corruption in a box.
Yes.
We've failed to take it outside just the money, outside just the finance, and bring it back to even nature and our day-to-day life, Dr. Patricia. So how do we move forward?
I think we need to think out of the box, like you have said, and encourage the young people to report these corrupt activities, and to report even the risks they have highlighted out there, because it's not just about the money, but it could be the practices that are hampering on people's enjoyment of the environment, practices causing pollution. It could be somebody releasing waste into the wetlands. It could be somebody encroaching and misusing the wetlands or abusing the wetlands, irresponsible use of what we have. So I think we need to encourage people to report some of these activities, to report some of the risks, so that we are able to investigate and quickly fix than waiting for post-mortem,
Yes.
because it's very, very important. Then I think we also need to keep the public sector honest and transparent. How do people come out to be honest and transparent? Because if someone is going to get a permit or a license, the regulatory impact assessment was done. It's a clear-cut method on how you're supposed to be carrying out your responsibilities. Then you do irresponsible use of what you've been given. Do you really love your country or have your country at heart? I think it's important that the public sector remains honest and transparent and be able to detect some of these irregularities. We need to stop dishonest practice. And I'm glad this comes out in a conversation where we are unpacking the national values, where there are principles of honesty, integrity, accountability, responsibility, and patriotism. Because if you love your country, then whatever it is you do it with honesty. We have seen people applying for jobs and humbling themselves and saying, you see me, I can work with minimum supervision. But minimum supervision has proved to us that someone can be irresponsible when they're given the responsibility to take on such positions. So we need to ensure that the public sector, first of all, the public sector employees also act in public interest, because now people have become very selfish and they think about me, myself, and I, but they need to think about something which is for the common good of all, in public interest. If I am going to let this license be cleared, or if I'm going to sanction the clearance of this license, is it in public interest? What are the implications? Am I able to follow up and ensure that the person who has been granted this license to do this is doing it in a responsible manner? So I think these are tips which we need to sell out. We need to market this out there. We need to get to engage with members of the public sector so that everybody does their responsibility in order to protect and preserve our environment. Then even within the homes where we stay, if I have cut down my tree within my plot, can I at least plant 5? Because at the end of the day, it will be a windbreak, and it's for the good of my family.
True.
It is for the common good of my neighbors, because these are rainmakers as well. This improve on the environment and the atmospheric conditions, like Vianney has said. So much as we have the commitments by the government, we have signed these international conventions, we have ratified a number of them. Domestically, we need to ensure that we are actually implementing, because it is not good enough for us to have beautiful laws and policies, conventions, and yet we are not implementing. So we need to protect our environment and prove to be the actual guardians of this earth, like the theme of this conversation. Thank you very much.
And I think we have so many boxes, I've realized. Some of us also think that the topic of environment and the climate is something that is for their international spaces, the policy maker spaces. It can't just come back home to our personal. Is that something you think is happening with the young people right now, Monica?
Yeah, at first it was, me inclusive. It seemed more of a bigger, broader version, but when she narrowed it down to your compound, what's happening in your home, how are you dealing with the environment that you have access to, I understood that the responsibility is actually more personal than it is group. That it only becomes, you know, that saying that says one by one makes a bundle. So it starts with you, then your neighbor, then your community, then your district, then finally your country. So you cannot tell us that in your home you're cutting down a tree, but if we vote you and you are, let me say, or appointed to the office of director of NEMA, you are going to suddenly start preserving our forests.
Out of the blue.
Exactly. So it starts down there, and personally, that's a. I'm very glad to have been, you know, in this conversation, because it has, at least that box has been unpacked, and I understand the responsibility therein now.
So Vianney, how do we move on from this?
Charity.
After here, how do we just go forward?
Activate charity begins at home.
Yes.
I think when we talk about climate change, it's no longer far-fetched rocket science. It's the reality with us. The floods, the prolonged dry spells, the failure of the crops to poor harvests by our mothers, our parents, our farmers in our gardens. And therefore, with the young people in this country, the climate change fight begins with each one of us, and corruption undermines the fight, the climate change fight. And that's why it's important we begin to mention it, begin to talk about it.
Yeah.
That's very, very critical. And the things that we need to do begin with me, and then as she has said, and then with the community, and then the whole village, the whole sub-county, the district, and then the country. But I just want to emphasize that as young people, we need to be aware. We need to be aware of climate change and what that means. We need to be aware of what needs to be done.
Yeah.
For tree planting alone, for example, and I can talk about tree planting, I can talk about agriculture, I can talk about water for use, productive use and domestic use. But let me just speak tree planting, for instance. We are saying as young people that, for example, we can embrace tree growing through basically two methods. One, boundary tree planting, where each home, each young person can plant 10 trees in the boundary of our small garden, and at least ensure that 2 of those 10 trees are fruit trees.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But what we are saying is, can we now push this agenda to be holistic, and every household in every village does it? Now, the windbreak that Dr. Patricia was talking about, it happens when it is a corporate village affair, and we have all planted in our small, yes, beginning with small landholders. Then those are small. Then we're saying the big landholders, people who have idle land, government and other actors, we need to engage them so that they appreciate the benefit of tree growing. And this must be contextual, that what the species for Karamoja are different from the species for northern Uganda. Okay?
That is true.
So what grows in Moroto is different from what grows in Guru, and different from what is in Arua, or what is in Kisoro or Kasese. And we need to make sure that they are doing it right, in the right time, because this is season dependent. So if you're supposed to plant at the beginning of the rainy season, you cannot plant 3 weeks later. Sometimes these inputs, and that's some of the challenges that government programs have had in tree planting and coffee growing, because these inputs arrive late. It must be timely because this is dependent. So, and then we are doing tree growing with result-oriented tree growing. And actually, the key performance indicator, Dr. Patricia, is 8 out of every 10 trees must grow.
I think so many of us just leave it at, I did plant a tree,
Yeah.
and that's it. I've done
You
my
don't
part.
And that's why we're saying
Prioritize,
that we need to train and empower young people. Do they know what it means to raise a nursery bed? Do they know how to prepare the field for the seedlings to be planted? Do they know what it means to actually look after the seedling? Because there are other competing priorities. But with the issue of climate change with us, no longer at the national level, no longer at the doorstep, but with me and you, because it's affecting you and me, it's affecting our lives and our livelihood. That's why we must do things differently in how we do our agriculture, because we are still depending on agriculture as our key economic
Activity.
Yes,
Yeah.
we are still dependent on nature, and we can keep unpacking this. I think we will need to unpack what the value chain of reforestation, afforestation. We need to unpack the value chain of climate smart agriculture and what it means for the young people and the environment. We need to unpack what it means for value addition and market linkages for the young people, because so that we begin to appreciate why we need to protect the environment, why we need to live in harmony with it, but also be aware of corruption and report, but also deal with these tendencies. And that's why we're also talking about the issue of transparency. One of the things I've picked from the parish development model is that the president has been mentioning specific monies that are coming to the parishes and say, we are giving you this much. So if at the roots, at the village level, we are not seeing this much coming to us,
Yeah.
then we should be able to ask questions. So we need to also improve and do better in terms of information sharing with the young people,
And awareness.
but also strengthen our reporting mechanisms. You know, one of the jokes that is made in police, that I will put her in, then she will come following me.
What
You
does
know, by
that
the
mean?
time I reach the gate of the police, she's already following me. You know what they normally
Systems,
say
that's
about it. No, we need to strengthen our systems. And that's why we come. So that if there is, actually, that's what we call an integrated information management system.
Yeah.
That if an issue is reported, there is a good feedback mechanism, and they are actually responded to and acted upon. Okay? Even at local level, this can be regionalized and localized in such a way that the cow and his team, the technical team, and also at the district level can actually be able to respond to some of these things. And maybe because of lack of the information gap, some things don't work the way they are supposed to work. So the strengthening of the feedback system and to know that actually if I see something that is not usual, and I'm concerned about it as a young person, if I report to the corresponding person, something
Is going to happen.
It's going to
Yes.
happen.
We're coming to a close of the show. We're just going to get our final remarks from the panel, and I'm going to start with Monica right over there.
Thank you so much. Final remarks. And preserving the environment is everyone's responsibility. You cannot leave it to someone else, because in the end, or at the end, the impact is, it doesn't select, right? The bad effects of like the floods, they won't segregate and say this one did it, this one didn't do it, so we drown this one's car and leave this one's car. We are all pruned to become either beneficiaries of our good deeds with preserving the environment, or to bear the consequences of watching our neighbor destroy the environment. So let's join hands and let's do the best we can to make our home a better place.
Yes. Dr. Patricia.
Thank you. I think it's a responsibility, like Monica has said, for us to preserve the environment. To preserve the environment and also respect humanity. Because if we do not preserve the environment, then we are doomed. As young people, it's important for us. It begins from home. It begins with you and I. As young people, we have seen the implications of corruption in the environment, and we can join hands together to fight corruption by beginning from the environment. Take care of the environment around you, report cases of misuse or abuse of the environment, encroachments into the wetlands and swamps, report the cases so that we can quickly take action on what we have detected. Thank you very much.
Yes, and then I'm going to Vian.
Climate change affects you and me. And therefore, our actions must reflect that we are aware of climate change and its effects, and whatever we are doing is enhancing our adaptive capacity, our resilience as young people, as a community, and as a country. But much more importantly, things like corruption that we are talking about today are dealt with with the efforts and the strength that it requires as young people. And we are the ones to fight this corruption. Because we are the ones who are losing out in this process.
Yes, allow me to say bye-bye. The conversation doesn't stop here. We are available on Twitter at YourSpaceUganda. But from us to you, have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.